Hi everybody, it's Keith with BobsCNC. Welcome to Shop Talk, and as always, I'm sitting next to my best friend Bob.
And I'm sitting next to my best friend Keith.
And we're going to be talking about the anatomy of a CNC router, and today we're going to talk about spindles.
Yeah.
And one of the things that kind of drove me nuts as I began learning this stuff is you've got routers, you've got spindles, you've got VFD,
ATCs.
oh Lord, there's more stuff I got to learn. Okay, so as guys are shopping, what's the difference between these things?
Yeah, so this is part two. So if you haven't seen part one, you need to understand your budget. So we're not going to go over that, but we'd like to just kind of discuss the advantages and disadvantages. So we'll start out with maybe the least expensive.
Yep.
And just work our way up.
Okay.
Okay, so the least expensive is a router, a small router. They're about $100.
Yep.
But you can buy bigger routers, like more horsepower, right?
Right.
So the advantage is they're simple, right? You can plug them into the wall, turn the on switch on, and if it's got variable speed, you can just play with that little knob and it slows down and speeds up. It's intuitive. You really don't have to read the directions, right? You just understand how it works intuitively.
Read the directions.
Okay, read the directions. Sorry. Okay, it has either a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch collet, and for some you can buy an 1/8 inch collet, right? You can actually hook it up to an IoT switch. So they make a switch. It's called an Internet of Things switch,
Yep.
but it really is you have a small voltage input from your controller that changes the high voltage input to on or off. So you can turn on and off the router by the controller.
Right.
Okay, so
But you can do that with any of them.
yeah,
All right.
for sure.
So now at the lower level, we're looking at machines that are brushed, just an old school electric motor.
So now you're talking about disadvantages, right? So
Yeah.
a brush motor is going to wear those brushes out.
Right.
If you've owned a CNC that has a router on it, like some of the BobsCNC routers have brushes, then you are going to have to replace those brushes. So you want to get you an extra set. And they're not hard to change. They're not that expensive, but it's definitely a downside to that. The other thing is you cannot set the spindle speed with the computer. You have to play with the little knob that we were talking about to set the speed. Most of the time though you're setting at the same speed anyway, so maybe that's not a big deal. So it's definitely the least expensive, but it doesn't have really any features, and maybe the maintenance, you'd say, yeah, it's got more maintenance than the other.
What about a brushless router?
So so the next one you would go up to the brushless router, and they have some kind of controller that they give you. Typically they're around 48 volts, so you have to buy a 48 volt power supply and be able to hook that up. And most of those have the cable that connects their controller to their spindle. So now you're brushless, so you don't have to replace brushless. The other advantage that you're going to have is the collet now is going to be an ER collet, different sizes, but you'll be able to get collets that are different sizes. So you may get one that's 6 millimeters, one that's 1/4 inch. And there is a little bit of a difference that will make one work and not work, right? So you may be able to start with a metric and go 3 to 8 millimeters, or a standard and still do your 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch. So you have that. Now you'll be able to turn on and off your router with the computer, and you'll be able to change your speed with the computer. I will say changing the speed with the computer for me is really not, there's no advantage unless you have an automatic tool changer, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Well, that would also be impacted by the type of material you're cutting.
Right.
And when, like I'm working with wood all the time, there's really no change in RPM.
Right. Yeah, and besides that, you're going to set it based on the bit that you're using for that project. So if you can't automatically change the bit, there's no reason to automatically change the speed.
Correct.
Right? But you could set it with the computer, so you could have the G-code file, and it would remember that it was that size bit, and that would be the RPM.
Now both these are air cooled, the brushed and brushless.
Yeah, for the smaller ones that we're talking about, the 48 volt DC ones, they're air cooled. The disadvantage would be is you have to understand how to connect them. Again, they're not that difficult because you have to deal with a power supply that you're going to have to plug into the wall. So you got to do a cordless switch, and then you have to take the other side of that 48 volts and plug it into the controller. Most of them have decent instructions, have a power cord. But if we step up to the next, which would be your air-cooled and your water-cooled spindle that are driven by a variable frequency drive, or a VFD, you've heard them say. It's a little box. Now, the advantages that you have for these spindles is the same. You can turn them on and off, right?
Via the control.
Via the G code, right? So the controller's doing that. You can change the speed. You can actually reverse the direction, right, if you wanted to. And also they're quite a bit more horsepower than the smaller brushless spindles, right? The disadvantage of them would be it's going to take you a bit to figure out how to make it spin. So if you're not electrical savvy, or if you don't want to spend a lot of time that has one that is already set up, you're going to have to buy your own wire, right? Because they're not going to give you that cable that goes from their spindle to the drive. It has its own power supply, but sometimes they're 220, or a lot of them are 220. I've seen some for 110, but you're going to be limited to the spindle size then. So they're really cool in the fact that you can do the same thing, turn them on, turn them off. You can change directions, but again, why would you want to change directions? The only reason that I would think I would need to change directions if I was threading, you have to put the tap in and take the tap out. That requires special equipment. So for me, that's not really an advantage. So let's talk about air-cooled versus water-cooled. This is just for me. A lot of people think water-cooled are really awesome. And if I had a shop where I had a lot of metal equipment and I was using mist or flood to cool my bits anyway, then water-cooled's not really a big deal. But for me, I'm a woodworker. So the air-cooled is just a less maintenance, less messy, to have in my shop. So they both are cooled. One's just cooled by air and one's cooled by water. It doesn't really matter how it's cooled as long as your spindle stays cool. So I would definitely go, if you're in a wood shop and you don't want the extra hassle of the water, I would definitely get an air-cooled spindle. They're not that much more expensive. I think, for the 1.5 kilowatts to 2.2 kilowatts, you may spend an extra $60 or $70 to get the air-cooled model.
How about the differences between routers or spindles and their horsepower rating?
Yeah, so you can buy, like our machines are using a small trim router, and they're great for the machine, but they definitely don't have a lot of horsepower. No. But you can buy larger routers that have lots of horsepower, as much as the spindle does, but they're still going to have brushes, right? And they're going to consume more power, and they're going to be louder, right? And again,
any advantage in cutting?
No, not at all. I think noise is going to be less because of the way that they're designed. However, when you're cutting, it's pretty loud anyway. But the other advantage, that you have with a spindle is maintenance-wise. You don't have brushes, and then you can turn things on and off and change speeds, change directions. However, again, I was looking at a spindle the other day that had an automatic tool changer, an ATC, right? So this thing would actually go grab the right tool, set the right RPM, cut it, go grab another tool, set the RPM, cut that profile. So for me, if you're going to take full advantage of being able to set the RPM, then you need an automatic tool changer. Because if you don't have an automatic tool changer, then you're not going to be, you're going to have to stop to change bits, so you can, click, click, and change the RPM. So maybe there's a coolness factor that I can change the RPM during the, process of the G code, but it's not really necessary until you have an automatic tool changer, as far as using them.
So guys, as you're shopping for your CNC, make sure you sit down and investigate the type of spindle or router that's being offered in the different specifications with that. If you have any questions, you can get a hold of us at the help desk at BobsCNC.com. And until next time, we'll see you.